Shalom, everyone. And the topic that I'm going to discuss is how that we know Yeshua is the Messiah. Now, usually when people talk about the Messianic prophecies and how we know that Yeshua is the Messiah, in most circles, the tactic is sort of, take 300 some odd, at least allegedly Messianic prophecies, throw them against the wall and see if some of them will stick. Okay? So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be looking at some of the Messianic prophecies that I think are the most solid and are most convincing prophecies that would indicate that Yeshua was the Messiah. Now, I have taught this study that I'm doing right now, to Orthodox Jews before, and they were very surprised, because what we're going to do is strictly in the Tanakh. We're not going to look at the New Testament and see what the New Testament says, but when we're finished, what I'm going to show you from the Tanakh alone is that the Messiah was an individual who was executed, but not for himself, on behalf of others, sometime between 26 and 44 CE, by having his hands and his feet pierced, and that he was born in Bethlehem, or Beit Lechem. Okay? Now, that's all I can really show you in these most solid prophecies. Okay? But then the question will come, if Yeshua is not the Messiah, then who is? Now, I taught this to this Orthodox Jewish woman, and she wrote down every passage I went to. She figured, this is some trick. This is some kind of fixed Bible he's got. So she went home and she got out her grandfather's Tanakh and looked up every passage. And everything was there just the way that I had shown. This is nothing hokey here. All right. Let's start by looking at Isaiah 53. No, what am I saying? Let's start with Isaiah 53. Let's start with Isaiah 29. Seeing you're talking Messianic prophecy, and Isaiah 53 pops out. Isaiah 29. Isaiah 29 is probably not a text that immediately would spring to your mind as having anything whatsoever, particularly to do with Messianic prophecy. But if we read in verse 10, first of all, this prophecy in Isaiah 29 is addressed to woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Ariel means Lion of El, and was a sort of a nickname for Jerusalem. So it's addressed to Jerusalem, essentially, to Judah. Okay? And in verse 10 it says, "For Yahweh has poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and has closed your eyes, the prophets and your rulers, and the seers has he covered. And the visions of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray you. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, as saying, Read this, I pray you. And he says, I'm not learned. Verse 14, just kind of skipping on through here. Verse 14 refers to a marvelous work, even a marvelous work and a wonder. And then we get down to verse 18. It says, In that day shall the deaf hear the words of the book. What book? Is it this book that is sealed? In that day shall the deaf hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. Now here we have a prophecy that basically says that Judah, as a whole, overall, typically, is not able to see something in this book. Can you see that? The man that's literate or that's learned can't see it because it's sealed. The man that's illiterate can't see it because he can't read. But verse 18 tells us that in that day shall the deaf hear the words of the book, and the eyes of all the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. So it would seem to say then that at some point in time, that information would become unsealed, that they would comprehend that information, and when that happened, this blindness would end, wouldn't it? And that would be, so we have a sort of an apostasy and then a restoration, a falling away and then a coming back. Okay? Now, same thing talked about in Torah and Deuteronomy 28 and 29 and Leviticus 26. If the people would keep the Torah, there'd be blessings. If they didn't keep the Torah, there'd be curses. Which one did we do? Anybody know? We didn't keep the Torah, did we? What happened? Babylonian invasion, 600. Okay? Has the curse of Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 and 29 ended? Well, we're going to talk about that, but the answer is no. It was 70 years, but there's more to it than that. Okay? It hasn't ended. So what's going on here is that we're told, hey, don't worry, there's going to be a restoration. Now, when we talk about the restoration of our people, Israel, what is that almost always tied to? Who is that almost always tied to? Mashiach. Okay? So maybe, not for sure, but just maybe, this might have something to do with Mashiach. Okay. Now let's look at another passage in the Tanakh. Let's look at Daniel chapter 9. I'm sorry, chapter 12. Verse 4. Now, a little trivia question for you. Who wrote first? Isaiah or Daniel? Isaiah wrote first. Daniel wrote second, right? So Daniel was privileged to the words of Isaiah when he wrote, didn't he? He probably knew Isaiah frontwards and backwards when he wrote his book. All right, Daniel 12:4. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And then verse 9, and he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. You see that? Now, maybe, just maybe, since Daniel knew Isaiah 29, when Daniel talks about something about something or things about his book being sealed until the last days, maybe, just maybe, he's referring to Isaiah 29? The concept of Isaiah 29? Well, if that's the case, then Isaiah 29 tells us that when it becomes unsealed, something new would be revealed to our people that they didn't realize before. It was there all along in this book, and they didn't see it. Okay, now this is very clear in prophecy. I mean, whether you accept Yeshua as the Messiah or don't accept Yeshua as the Messiah, if you take the perspective that Rabbinic Judaism as exists today, has complete understanding, and isn't lacking some important piece of information, then this prophecy is incorrect. Because this prophecy says that our people are missing some vital piece of information that they won't understand until the last days, and then bam, it's going to change. Their eyes will be opened up, and they'll go, wow, I didn't realize that was there. Okay. Well, so we're looking in Daniel, okay, for some piece of information that would be sealed up, that would reveal some new piece of information that would just open one's eyes and lead to a restoration of our people. So let's look at Daniel chapter 9. I think I'm going to make a good case that at least part of that material is sealed up in Daniel chapter 9. Let me tell you something about Daniel. According to the Talmud, when Jonathan, y'all know who Jonathan, well, some of you may know Targum Jonathan ben Uzziah. He was supposedly one of the students of Hillel, according to tradition. He wrote Targum of the prophets. That's the most popular, most accepted Targum of the prophets. In fact, Targum Onkelos is the standard Targum for the Torah. Targum Jonathan is the standard Targum for the prophets. The Targums were very authoritative. When the Torah readings were done, then they would read from the Targum. When the half-Torah reading was done, then they'd read it from the Targum. Okay? The Targums were paraphrases. The Targums told us what the things were understood to mean. Okay? But Targums were in Aramaic. All right. Now, according to the Talmud, Jonathan ben Uzziah decided one day he was going to write a Targum on the book of Daniel. And a bat kol, a voice from heaven, came to him and said, "Who is it that's been revealing all of my secrets?" And then says that he's not permitted to write this Targum because the time of the Messiah is revealed in it. Now, it's not Daniel specifically, it just says the Ketuvim. Okay? The Tanakh is divided into the Torah, the Nava'im, the Ketuvim. In fact, if you have a Jewish Tanakh, or if I think there's some of them back there on the back tables, the complete Jewish Bible has the books in their correct order divided up into the Torah, the Nava'im, and the Ketuvim. Okay? The law of the prophets and the writings. So somewhere in the writings, in the Ketuvim section, we are told that, according to this story at least, Jonathan wasn't permitted to write a Targum explaining it all because the time of the Messiah was given in it. He wasn't permitted to write it. And that's an interesting parallel, by the way, to something in the New Testament. I wasn't going to go into the New Testament, but I'll just tangent this real quick. We also have a case in the book of Revelation where John is not allowed to write something because it was sealed. Daniel's not allowed to write something because it's sealed. And according to the Targum, to the Talmud, Jonathan wasn't allowed to write something about the time of the coming of the Messiah. All right. Because apparently it was sealed. It was a secret. All right. According to Josephus, Daniel was respected above all the other prophets, according to Josephus, because not only did Daniel prophesy of future events, but according to Josephus, he foretold the date of their fulfillment. Well, this is all pointing to Daniel chapter 9. By the way, of the books of the Ketuvim, there's only 3 for which there was never a Targum written: Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel. Only one of the books in the entire Ketuvim is particularly prophetic. Daniel. In fact, some people pose the big mystery. Why is Daniel in the Ketuvim instead of the Nava'im? Okay. The Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, in a document called 11Q13, use this section of Daniel exactly the same way as we do, basically. Daniel chapter 9. Let's start here and see what's going on in Daniel's head. It says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of years whereof the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Okay, everybody's familiar with that prophecy of Jeremiah, right? Verse 3. Okay, now let me kind of explain a little bit here. Daniel was actually taken from the Holy Land, taken off to Babylon. Okay, the 70-year period that is talked about by Jeremiah has recently been completed. Daniel's an old man by this time. Daniel's got to be at least 90 years old. Okay, So Daniel, by this time, Daniel's 90 years old. He wants to go home. He wants to make Aliyah. He hasn't seen the homeland in 70 years. And here he's got this prophecy from Jeremiah that says 70 years. And so he's hoping that maybe, he's trying to remind Hashem of this 20 years, of this 70 years, like he doesn't remember or something. But he knows there's more to it than that, and that's what's going to unfolds as we go on in his prayer. And I set my face unto Yahweh, to the Lord God, to set my prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed unto Yahweh my God, and made my confession, and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him, and to them that keep his commandments. He's trying to butter him up. We have sinned, and have committed iniquity, and have done wickedly, and have rebelled even by departing from your precepts and from your judgments. Now let me key in on what his problem is. Daniel knows the Torah inside out. And he knows Leviticus 26. And if you read Leviticus 26, that's where the parallels Devarim 28 and 29. It's where the blessings and the curses are found. Okay? One of the things that Leviticus 26, says is that if you don't heed to these curses, if you don't heed to the curse when it comes, what does he say? He says he's going to multiply it how many times? 7 times. Over and over and over. In Leviticus 26, he says, and if you don't do it then I'll punish you 7 times more. All right? Let's see here. So we got initially 70-year captivity. Remember Jeremiah prophesied it and it happened, right? 70-year captivity under Babylon. Babylonian captivity. Daniel's thinking, oh my goodness. Oh, I can't see it? Do it again then. All right, we start with a 70-year captivity. Okay? But what happens if we don't pay heed to that captivity? He punishes us 7 times more. $490 years. Daniel's sitting here worried that 70 years didn't do the trick, so now there's going to be another 490 years, according to Torah. He doesn't want that. That's terrible. Nobody wants that. 490 years? Can you imagine that? So he's praying. He says, we have sinned. Verse 5, he fesses up. He knows the score. He says, we have sinned and we have committed iniquity and have done wickedly and have rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and from your judgments. Neither have we hearkened unto your servants the prophets, which spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but unto us confusion of faces, as at this day. We're confused. We don't know what's going to happen. He's painting a picture. We don't know what's going to happen. Really, what he really means and thinks is that he knows what's going to happen. He doesn't like it, so he's hoping maybe not. So, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to all Israel that are near and that are far off from all the countries where you have driven them because of their trespass that they have trespassed against you. O Lord, to us belongs confusion of face, to our kings, to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belongs mercies and forgiveness. He's trying to remind him that, he's asking for chesed. Later on today, we're going to talk about Jewish mysticism and the concept of the balance between chesed, mercy, and gevurah, might, strength, judgment. The rabbis say, and I think quite correctly, that if the world was founded on chesed alone, it would destroy itself. Okay? So it says, to the Lord our God belong mercies and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. Neither have we obeyed the voice of Yahweh our God to walk in his Torahs. His Torahs. How many laws? Torahs. That's an interesting topic. We could hit that another time. How many Torahs are there? Which he set before us by his servants, the prophets. Yes, all Israel have transgressed your Torah, even by departing, that they might not obey your voice. Therefore the curse is poured out upon us. And the oath that is written in the Torah of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him. He's referring to Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 and 29. He has confirmed his words which he spoke against us and against our judges that judged us by bringing upon us a great evil. The word there would be ra'ah, which is not necessarily evil, but just a bad thing. Something we didn't like. For under the whole heaven has not been done as has been done upon Jerusalem. As it is written in the Torah of Moshe, all this evil has come upon us, yet made we not our prayer before Yahweh our God, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand your truth. That's the key verse, verse 13. Daniel knows the score. He knows there was supposed to be 70 years. He knows the curse, and he refers to the Torah of Moshe on this, and he knows, even though he doesn't mention it, he knows that there's a promise of a curse of 70 times 7, or a curse of 7 times the curse, if the curse doesn't affect them and cause them to turn from their iniquity. Verse 13 tells us, did they turn from their iniquity? No. So did the 70-year captivity really end? No. All right. Verse 14. Therefore has Yahweh watched upon the evil and brought it upon us, for Yahweh our God is righteous in all his works which he does, for we obey not his voice. And now, O Lord our God, that have brought your people forth out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and have gotten thee renown as at this day, we have sinned, we have done wickedly. O Lord, according to all your righteousness, I beseech you, let your anger and your fury be turned away from the city of Jerusalem, your holy mountain, because of our sins, and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and your people have become a reproach to all that are about us. Now therefore, O Lord, our God, hear this prayer, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications, and cause your face to shine upon your sanctuary that is desolate for the Lord's sake. Not for our sake. See, he's playing the I don't know the word for it, but he's smooth talking. He goes, but you're so merciful and forgiving. Yeah, we know we've not done what we were supposed to do, but for your sake, for the Lord's sake, why don't you do this? Verse 18. Oh my God, incline your heart and hear upon your eyes, and behold our desolations in the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplication before you for our righteousness, but for your great mercies. Mercies. Chesed. Okay? So he says, we screwed up. We want you to show us mercy anyway. And we want to, just for your sake, because what's the world going to think when they look at us? Since we're supposed to be your chosen people. Verse 19. O Lord, Hear, O Lord, forgive, O Lord, hearken and do defer not. For your own sake, O my God, for your city and for your people are called by your name. And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel. Anybody here know any Hebrew? What is Gabriel? Gavrael. What does it mean? Gavarel. Gavra, might, strength is El. Gavra is the opposite of chesed, the opposite of grace and mercy. They're his opposing qualities. On the one side, chesed, mercy and grace. On the other side, judgment, strength and might. Okay? So Daniel's praying for chesed, hoping that he doesn't get Gevurah, and who shows up? You see? All right. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give you skill and understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, the commandment came forth, and I came to show you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. Verse 24. 70 weeks are determined. Now let's stop right there. 70 weeks. It doesn't really say 70 weeks. It says 77s. Okay? It could be 7 of anything. All right? But what was the... Let's pause here and let me ask you a little Torah question and see if anybody knows. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? The main commandment that was that we violated, that was the reason that the curse kicked in. Does anybody know? Go ahead. Let's get several answers and then I'll answer it. Go ahead. Right. Anybody else? Well, I already said right. Duh. All right. Yes. It's the Sabbath. It is the Sabbath years. Now, why is that such a big deal? Why is that such a big deal? Well, I'll tell you. Why would he make that the measure of faith, the measure of trust for us as a people? Well, I'll tell you why. It's like this. And you probably heard something like this before from somebody. Oh yeah, religion's really nice, but I got a family to feed. You're telling me not to plant a crop this year? Religion's real nice, but hey. You see what I mean? So he wanted to... That commandment requires faith and trust. That commandment proves our trust for him. Okay? And it also, by the way, was the ultimate test of the Torah. Think about it. You decide that you're going to create your own little cult here. Okay? And what's the one thing you're not going to put in your Torah, your list of rules? How about a commandment that tells everybody to let the soil rest every 7 years? Now, what's the remedy? What kind of remedies would you have for letting the soil rest every 7 years? How could you feed? The immediate question is, how am I going to feed my family? What's the solution? What are some obvious solutions, just thinking as men, that we would come up with for that problem? Storage, which would entail probably planting more and things like that. Storing, yeah. Now, what is the remedy the Torah offers?
Trust Yahweh.
Yeah. It just promises a double crop. That's all. It just promises a double crop if you'll do it. Now, that's great. You start up this little cult, and 6 years into it, there's no double crop. You just got your own neck. You see? What kind of harebrained idiot would fraudulently create a Torah that was a ticking time bomb that would explode after 6 years and prove that he was nothing? Exactly. All right. But back to Daniel here. All this ties into the 7 years. Okay? These are not just weeks, they're weeks of years. And they're not just any weeks of years, they're the 7-year cycles. Those were special 7th year years. Do you follow? All right. Now, so these are 7-year cycles. 70 weeks are determined. 70 weeks. 70 times 7, how much is that? 490 years. But it's just not any 490 years. It's a specific 490 years because it's according to the 7-year cycle. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity. That's what we were supposed to do during the 70 years, right? Now we're being told that we're going to have to do it with the 490 years. And to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision. What's that all about? Seal up the vision. That sounds like Isaiah 29. And prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Okay. So what we got here, let's start with our starting point for our count. Okay? Our starting point for the count is the going forth of the word. Let's see. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. Now, if we go back to Nehemiah, or is it Ezra? I think it's Ezra. Chapter 7, starting in verse 11. We won't read it in its entirety here, but this is a letter from Artaxerxes that is the decree that Daniel is talking about. And we know what date it goes to. It's 457 BCE. So, 457 BCE is our starting point. Somebody got a calculator handy? All right, got somebody with a calculator. 457 plus 490. 490 years from 457 takes us to... Got an answer? No. No. Somebody, do you actually have a calculator handy? Minus 457. 33? All right. CE. Now, but we're talking about this 490 years falls after 457. But we don't know for sure what the first Sabbath year after 457 was anymore. I mean, scholars debate about it. It's arguable. But we don't know. We just know that sometime that the count starts within 7 years after 457. All right? So that creates a 7-year window on each side of 33. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So, the Messiah would, Be a 7-year window after 33. I thought I had 26 in there. Don't know how that happened. 32. Actually, it'd be 32 anyway because there's no 0 point on the calendar. So it'd be at least 32. Let me check something here. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm doing the whole 490 years. But it says 483 here. It's only part of the 490. It leaves off 7 years in verse 20. So that's what we're doing wrong. Verse 24, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression and so on. But then in verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That leaves off 7 years. That's 483. Let's do it again with 483. 26. 2. That's 14 years, 7 years on each side, so add 14 years. I think that gets you to what, 44? Somewhere in there? 40? 40? All right, sometime between 26 and 40. Sometime between 26 and 40 is the end of that 483 years, depending on when the Sabbath years fall. There's no way around that. And what happens? Well, let's read. After 62 weeks, now this is the 62 weeks that follow the 7 weeks, okay, shall the Messiah be cut off. What does cut off mean? Executed. It's an idiomatic way of saying executed, okay? Get this is a strange thing to say, but not for himself. Well, you mean maybe he was executed for somebody else? And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, the people of the prince would be Titus and his army. Now, Titus was a prince, oddly enough, because he ended up becoming Caesar. But he wasn't even in line to be Caesar at the time. That in itself was an amazing fulfillment of prophecy. He was a prince and didn't know it. And also this tells us that the sanctuary has to be destroyed after this Messiah comes and is cut off. Has the sanctuary been destroyed? Yeah. All right. Yes. All right. Now we're not going to go into the final week and how that works out. That's a whole different ball game. Let's just stick with the 483-year prophecy here. So we have a 483-year prophecy to start out with that tells us that Messiah would be cut off. Oh, but not for himself, by the way. Between 26 and 44 CE. Somewhere in that ballpark. Somewhere in that range. All right, that's point number one. And there's no way around that. Believe me, I've debated anti-missionaries. And they've got some bizarre ways of trying to explain this thing that really make absolutely no sense. And they say, by the way, they have accused us of, well, let me tell you a story. There was a man walking through the woods, and he saw this arrow right in a tree, and a target that was painted on the tree, and the arrow was right in the middle of the bullseye. And he said, this is amazing. You know, who could hit this bullseye, this small bullseye, so well? And he goes on, and after a while he finds another one. And he goes on, and after a while he finds another one, and another one, and another one. He just can't believe this guy can hit this bullseye right there every time. After a while he comes upon this guy leaning back against a tree, sipping on a beer, got a bow and arrow in his hand, and a paintbrush in his other hand. And he looks over to him and he says, are you the guy that shot all those arrows and hit that target right dead center every time? And he said, well, yes, I am. And he goes, well, that's just amazing. I'm so pleased to meet you. And he says, well, first off, let me tell you how I do it. First, I shoot the arrow into the tree. And then I go paint the target. Okay? Well, they'll say that that's the kind of tactic we're using, but we're not. This is just what the prophecy says. As a matter of fact, there was somebody, an apologist, that did exactly that tactic in Messianic apologetics. Rabbi Akiba. Guy comes along named Bar Koziba. Rabbi Akiba says, oh, this guy's the Messiah. And he renames him Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, and then says he's therefore fulfilled the prophecy of the star that would come out of Jacob. Now, that's a classic case of shooting the arrow into the tree first. Now, just to show you that we're not shooting the arrow into the tree first, back in 1949, I believe, I'm not sure when they found Cave 11, but in modern times, they found a scroll dating back to the 1st century called, scholars call this little scroll 11Q13. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's also commonly called the Melchizedek text. Lots of interesting stuff in this text. It's a little exegesis of Messianic prophecy to the last days and whatnot. And you know what? They take this Daniel 9 prophecy and they do exactly what I just did with it. Oh, something like 200 years before Yeshua was born. Okay. Let's look at some more prophecies, see if we can find out something more about this guy who is executed, but not for himself. Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 talks about somebody like this. Classic text. I won't go all through it right now. What's the time? How are we doing? 12 o'clock?
Almost 12.
Oh, okay. So I need to move on along here. All right. Isaiah 53. We have a figure who is cut off. Let me see if I can find the passage. Cut off out of the land of the living. I think it's in verse 7 or 8. Verse 8. For he was cut off out of the land of the living. So here we have a figure that is cut off. Now if you go study this text up and down, you'll find that he's cut off, but not for himself, on behalf of others. Now we can argue Isaiah 53 backwards and forwards. Believe me, I've done it. That's not the topic right now. But seems to have some insight into this guy that's cut off, but not for himself. Interestingly, that little document, 11Q13, ties Daniel 9, 24 through 27, to this very same section of Isaiah. All right. Well, let's see. Maybe we can find out something about what happened to him, how he died. Let's look at Zechariah. Chapter 12. Start in verse 1 so we get good context here. See, I don't do this cafeteria style thing where we just look at Messianic prophecies. So, oh, here's one, and here's 300 and some odd Messianic prophecies. You know. Zechariah chapter 10. Ask you of the Lord rain in the name of the latter rain, so that the Lord shall make bright clouds and give them showers of rain, every one grass. I'm in Zechariah chapter 12. I was looking at 10 there. Chapter 12. The burden of the word of the Lord, which stretches forth the heavens, and lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people round about, when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. When does this take place? I don't think so. When does this take place? It could have, by the way, taken place in 70 AD, but that's another story. There was a potential there, but it didn't happen that way. When does this take place? The siege on Jerusalem, all the nations come against Jerusalem. It's all through the prophets. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. Okay, verse 3. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people, and all that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Has that ever happened yet? No, not really. I mean, in a sense, but not any organized effort of the whole world against us. All right. In that day, says the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment, and his rider with madness. And I will open my eyes upon the house of Judah, and I will smite every horse of the people with blindness. And the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength, and the Lord of hosts their God. In that day I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheaf, and they shall devour all the people round about on the left, on the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. And the Lord shall save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. In that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David, and the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before them. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. You can see this is talking about the last day now, can't you? And I will pour out upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him, as one mourns for his only son. Okay. Now, very interesting and controversial passage there. It's the end of the world. Messiah ben David is coming. Okay? It's the end of the world. The Messiah ben David is coming. The Messiah, the son of David, is coming to take his throne. And when he comes, they look upon him whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. Who's the speaker here, by the way? Who is me? Yahweh. Read the text. Interestingly, the Talmud, Sukkot 52a, says that this is talking about Messiah ben Yosef. That's the suffering servant Messiah. You'll learn more about that in the Two Messiahs presentation that's done later. Okay. Also the Targum, Jonathan. Remember Jonathan's Targum? He says this is Messiah ben Yosef. All right. Now, there's a little controversy about the way the Hebrew is worded here. Does anybody have the Hebrew that I could borrow? I don't have it with me. Thank you so much. I'll give it right back. I'm sorry? No. No. 12:10. Okay. This is the controversial passage in question. I've seen it translated all kinds of ways to keep it from saying what it says. And you know, Hebrew is usually ambiguous. It can be translated lots of different ways. And yet, this is one of the most specific statements in Hebrew that I've ever seen.
What verse is it?
It's part of Zechariah 12:10. Oh, this is yours. I'm sorry. I was going to steal it and keep it. I'm sorry? No, I've got it up there now. Thank you. Anybody here know any Hebrew at all? I'm sure somebody here knows a little bit. All right. This means and. This suffix here means they. And this word means shall look. What's this word mean? Anybody know? It's an Aleph Lamed Yud. To me. Toward me. And it has to be toward me. There is no other way around it, no matter what the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible says, because they put toward one. Okay? Because that's a Yud, and the Yud on the end of a word like that means me, and that's what it means. Toward me. The next word does not translate into any language I know of, including Aramaic. It's a very unique Hebrew word. It's a special preposition. It. It points to the next word of the sentence as being the direct object of receiving the action that's being talked about. For example, the very first verse of the Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim v'et v'shamayim v'et haaretz. The heavens and the earth are receiving the action of being created. That's what that et means. All right, so here is saying that this, basically, is a direct object that's receiving the action of being looked upon. Okay? No way around that. Basic Hebrew grammar. This word is which, or who. And this word means, well, that u means they. It means thrust through or pierced. That's what it means. Okay? So, this is really simple Hebrew. It's amazing the shenanigans that I've seen gone through to try and keep it from saying what it says. And they shall look toward me. At whom they have pierced. And whom they have pierced is, therefore, the same as the one being looked upon, which is the same as me. Duh. Real simple. They shall look upon me, or toward me, it, i.e., whom they have pierced. What? Who's the speaker? Yahweh. Yahweh says, and they shall look toward me, whom they have pierced. Okay, and they shall mourn for him, as they would mourn for an only son. Okay. Now, we'll look at another, let's keep going here, okay? Now, the anti-missionaries will point to this passage, by the way, and they'll say that John misuses it when he quotes it, Yochanan, because they'll say that the Roman soldiers, when they looked upon him, didn't mourn, etc., 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 and besides, this is set in the last days. But that's not the context in which John uses it, especially if you go look at his other book, Revelation. He's saying that in the last days, there's this group of people that will look upon him whom they, the world, pierced at some earlier time. All right? Besides that, the rabbis tell us that this is Messiah ben Yosef.
How did they get lion at the end instead of pierced?
You're thinking of another passage, Psalm 22. You're thinking of Psalm 22. That's another deal. Okay. Let's keep going through Zechariah 13. In that day there shall be The rest of chapter 12, to keep it brief, describes the mourning. This tribe shall mourn, that tribe, all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, etc. Verse 13, in that day there shall be a fountain open to the house of David and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanness. And it shall come to pass in that day, says the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land. Remember that phrase because we'll come back to it. And they shall no more be remembered. And also, I will cause the prophets and the unclean spirit to pass out of the land. So the Messiah comes, judges the land, gets rid of all the false idols and whatnot. Wonderful stuff. Of course, when they look upon him, he was pierced. And he was Yahweh. Well, they look upon me whom they pierced. And shall come to, verse 4. And it shall come to pass in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed every one of the vision when he has prophesied, neither shall they wear a rough garment to deceive. But he shall say, now this is where it gets tricky in our English versions because they're almost all messed up here. Fortunately, we've got a gentleman here that's got the Hebrew that can back me up on what I'm about to tell you. The beginning of verse 5 and the beginning of verse 6, the beginning of verse 5 and the beginning of verse 6 are identical in the Hebrew. The first phrase of verse 5 and the first phrase of verse 6 are absolutely identical in the Hebrew. Is that not true?
Zechariah 13.
Zechariah 13, verses 5 and 6. Just the first word, basically, the first word and prefix.
The same word.
Yeah. Right. But, right, Va'amar. Now, our English translations, the KJV and whatnot, put, but he shall say in verse 5, and then verse 6, and one shall say, as if it was two different phrases. It's identical in the Hebrew. Now that creates a false impression because we're going to read this now. Verse 5, but he shall say, I am no prophet, I am not a husband, I am a husbandman, a farmer in other words, or a rancher, for men taught me to keep cattle from my youth. So he says, me? I'm not one of them false prophets. No, I keep cattle. That's it. Yeah, right. See, he's been brought before the Messianic judge. He's being judged, and he's saying, hey, me? No, I'm not one of them false prophets. And then this is where you get the false impression, because verse 6 will say, in most of your translations, and one shall say, as if the speaker has changed. But in the Hebrew, the phrase is identical to the beginning of verse 5. In the Hebrew, it's very clear that the speaker has not changed. That the speaker is the same speaker continuing to speak. You can see that in the Hebrew, right?
Yes.
Isn't that beautiful? Because it changes everything when you read the rest of it. And so if you got a KJV, you might circle the word one, which is, by the way, in italics, and write in he, because it's identical to the previous verse. It should be the same speaker. And he shall say unto him, he, being the false prophet, shall say unto the Messianic judge that's judging him, what are these wounds in your hands? Then he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Well, gee, I wonder if these wounds in his hands have to do with the fact that he had been pierced in the previous chapter in reference back. You see that? So he has these wounds in his hands because he'd been pierced in the house of his friends. By the way, the next verse is very familiar. Awake, O sword, against your shepherd and against the man that is my fellow, says the Lord of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn my hands upon the little ones. My hand upon the little ones. So what does this say? Well, it says that we're kind of a flashback in time when this guy got his hands pierced in the house of his friends. What did his buddies do? They ran out on him. It's all right here in the Tanakh. But it works a lot better in the Hebrew. Unfortunately, I mean, it's amazing that messianic prophecies that indicate Yeshua as the Messiah can get screwed up in the KJV and most of our modern translations. All right. Well, look, remember this guy, verse 2, he cut off the names of the idols. I want to look at one more passage here. Micah chapter 5. Verse 13. Verse 13. Your graven images also will I cut off. See that? Parallel to Zechariah 13. Here we have, in this section of Micah, a messianic individual who comes and destroys the idols from the land and wreaks judgment and whatnot. But if we skip up a few verses, in verse 2, we read some very interesting information about this messianic figure. But you, Bethlehem Ephrat, though you be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting. So we also learn that this guy was born in Bethlehem. All right. Now, also from Zechariah 12 and 13 there, we can, by way of remez, by way of implication, figure out the two comings of Messiah. Because when they see him, when he comes, they look upon him whom they have pierced, and it reflects upon a past event that took place. One more passage. What's the time?
12:17. You have 28 minutes.
Okay. Let's look at one more passage here that ties into all of that. It's where we can see the two comings of Messiah. It's in Psalm 110. Okay. And Yahweh said unto my Adon, sit you at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Yahweh shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule you in the midst of your enemies. And so on and so forth. There's other things I'll talk about Psalm 110 later, but let me just point out here, this is the Messiah being talked about according to the Targums and so on. Also, it is the Messiah that's being talked about according to, apparently according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. I will cover this. Okay. It says, Yahweh said unto my Adon. Now, once I start doing this with anti-missionaries, it's amazing if we don't set the ground rules first, how they can't tell the difference between right and left. So let's set some ground rules. Can we all agree that this is right and this is left? From your perspective over there, left, right, okay? All right. Verse 1. Yahweh said unto my Adon, sit you at my right hand. So that would put Yahweh right here, and Adon right here. Now, the anti-missionary response to this passage, by the way, is to say that King David is speaking, that he wrote this psalm to be recited by the chief priest. Of course, this is not one of the psalms that says that, so that's just guesswork. Anyway, and that the Adon that's being talked about here is King David. He's talking about King David. Yahweh said to my Adon, i.e. the Adon of the chief musician, come and sit at my right hand. All right? Now let's look at verse 5. Adonai, it says, Adonai at your right hand. What? Adonai at your right hand shall strike through kings in the day of his wrath. All right. One might say King David is Adon, because that means just Lord. Would anybody in their right mind say that King David is Adonai? Well, I can even do one up on you. There's 134 places according to the Masorah, that's the notes that go with the Masoretic text, that state that there's 134 places where the Masoretes changed Yahweh to Adonai because they thought the text was too confusing. And so this was actually one of the places where the text originally read, according to the Masorah, Yahweh. Now, what I wanted to get here in Psalm 110, though, is it says, Yahweh said unto my Adon, sit you at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. And then he goes out and, as it goes on to describe, he strikes through the kings and so on. Now, why does he say, sit you at my right hand? Obviously, he hasn't always been there. Do you understand what I'm saying from the psalm? Obviously, this fellow here comes and sits at the right hand and then comes back here after being up here in the heavenly sanctuary and strikes down the enemies. Well, wait a minute. That would be two comings of a Messiah. Do you see that? It's all right there in the Tanakh. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up questions. Well, let me summarize. I should summarize first real quickly. Well, we've got a Messiah that comes between 26 and 44. He comes to be executed, but not for himself. He's born in Bethlehem. Oh, he's executed by having his hands pierced. He's born in Bethlehem. And both in Psalm 110 and in Zechariah 12, it's apparent that he's here, and then he goes, and then he comes back. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts, Rotten Tomatoes? And you have to speak loudly for it to come out on the tape.
You repeat the question.
And I repeat the question. Any questions? Yes.
I was curious about Daniel chapter 9:26 when you're reading and bringing all the years together.
Yes.
And then it says, "And the end shall be with a flood until the end of the war. Desolation goes permanent." What flood is that referring to?
Is it a literal flood, you mean? I don't know.
What is it referring to, the flood?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a literal flood or not. I don't know. I believe it could have been, and this gets into a really deep subject of what I call the kingdom offer. I believe it could have been that that final week of Daniel's prophecy could have happened in the 1st century. It didn't happen in the 1st century because that Messiah that came along was going to say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is offered to you." And he would do that 7 years before the 490 years would end, so that they would have one last chance before it was too late, because you got to start 7 years ahead of time with that Sabbath of the land deal to let the land rest. And if they didn't, the 490 years wouldn't end either. It'd just keep going until they finally let the Sabbath of the land start, which would kick off the last 7 years. So we're still living in the curse.
Okay. In Leviticus 26, verse 18, 21, 24, and 28, it mentions 7.
Yeah, 7 times more.
Right. Is there any other understanding concerning this besides the 70 years in Babylon and the 490 years to Mashiach?
No, not that I'm aware of. As a matter of fact, even the anti-missionaries interpret that the way I'm interpreting it. But what they do is really strange, okay? What they do is they make that 490 years, okay? They make that 490 years start with, they coincide it. Instead of saying that there's 70 years, instead of saying that the 70 years were completed and then there's another 490 years, they say that what happens is that the 70 years are completed and then he decides whether or not to turn that into 490 years. So they start their 490-year count about 600 BCE with the destruction of the temple, and they count it forward until 70 CE with the destruction of the temple, and they call that 490 years by way of new math because it doesn't work. And that's because there's a huge gap of time that they claim is mysteriously missing and that nobody understands. And so when you see them make this argument, they'll time this 490 years from the Babylonian invasion to the destruction of the temple, and they won't give those actual years. They'll give a 490-year count in its place, because if they used real years, they would find that 600 to 70 doesn't work, so they stay away from the real years. Whereas what we're proposing works with real years. All right, any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Can you deal with a verse in Psalm that talks about hairs and
Sure.
translated lions?
Sure. I can do that real quick. The word in question is I'll start with this one. That's an easy one, and then all right. Okay, this is a very common scribal error between Yud and Vav that takes place in Hebrew manuscripts all the time. Okay? Ka'ari means ka, like, ari, a lion. Okay? Ka'aru means they, again, we saw that before, they, and ka'ar, have pierced, or pierced. Okay? Now, the Masoretic text has in Psalm 22, verse 19 or 18, I think, depending on whether you're using a Jewish or a Christian edition. The Masoretic text has, like a lion, literally, it says, like a lion, my hands and my feet. Now, if you have a JPS or something, you'll see a nice little whole phrase added in italics to make that make sense. Like a lion, they are at my hands and my feet. But there's no verb. It just says, like a lion, my hands and my feet. Doesn't even make sense. However, let's see. What other versions there have other readings? The Septuagint, the Peshitta Aramaic, 5 Hebrew manuscripts from the Middle Ages, and get this, the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you get the Dead Sea Scroll Bible, how many people have the Dead Sea Scroll Bible? Go look this up in the Dead Sea Scroll Bible. It'll tell you the Dead Sea Scroll has, they have pierced. Karu. Okay?
What's the common mistake they make in the wording in the Hebrew?
Between a Yud and a Vav. Just a scribal error. But the Masoretic text stands alone with the reading like a lion. It's a reading that doesn't make sense in context, is lacking a verb, and it's the only text in the world that has that reading. Every other text, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, including the oldest Hebrew text that exists, says they have pierced. Yes, there was a question.
What verse are you talking
Psalm 22, verse 17 or verse 18, depending on whether you're using a Christian Bible or a Jewish Bible. Oh, 16 or 17. It's kind of confusing because it's one of those verses that's not the same in the Jewish and Christian Bible. That word, by the way, is related to the word that's in, it's linguistically related to the karu word that's in Zechariah 12:10. One uses a kaf and the other uses a kuf, but they're linguistically parallel. All right. Any more questions? We should probably close for, we're off for lunch now, aren't we? Lunchtime. And what time is it? 12:30. So we close for lunch a half hour late. That's okay. Take an extra half hour for lunch. And you're okay? All right, then we'll meet you back here at 1:30. Is that what we got on the schedule? 1:30. Meet you back here at 1:30.